I'm Jessica Anne Pressler, and you've tuned into Your Traitor Within, a podcast that exposes the brutal truths of healing, self-discovery, and breaking free from relentless patterns of self-sabotage. Lisa Sonni is an internationally recognized relationship coach, author, advocate, and leading expert in trauma bond recovery. Lisa's work centers on the one mission to help survivors not only escape abuse, but reclaim their identity, integrity, and peace of mind stronger than before. A certified specialist in abuse education and emotional recovery, Lisa has helped thousands of survivors break free from abusive dynamics and rebuild lives rooted in self-worth, clarity, and confidence through her signature break and rebuild method. Lisa's expertise has been featured in major media outlets including US Today, NBC, ABC, and Impact, and she is the host of Real Talk, Relationships Uncensored podcast, combining evidence-based insight with lived understanding and a sarcastic flair to bring light to why survivors stay and how they finally break free. I am honored to welcome Lisa to Your Traitor Within, where she will not only share her insights as a clinician, but share her own Traitor Within story as well. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So I have loved your content from afar, meaning I haven't met you until today, but I have loved to watch and listen to you. I love how you tell it like it is, and I am sure that people will relate to that. And you give them a
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah, I try. I try to be relatable. I've often said I'm just some woman from somewhere. I've just been through similar things to what a lot of my clients have been through and kind of dragged my way out and
Mhm.
wanted to tell people my story so that people don't feel so alone because abuse happens in the shadows. So I
Mhm.
like to participate in dragging it into the light.
Love that. And I really think telling our story is the way to do it because, as you said, people don't feel alone. Maybe there's less shame because staying in these relationships, which many of us do way too long, one moment too long is too long, but some of us stay in years. And I want people to understand there's so much that's involved in why we stay, so much manipulation, trauma bond, which I know you focus on as well, and to give people the understanding that there's outside forces like manipulation, and there's also the traitor within.
Yes.
So, that keep us there, prisoner almost.
Yeah. Yeah, we do feel like prisoners. And I think, where people seem to start is YouTube, right? And learning, and you hear the word narcissist, you hear the word abuse, you start to recognize some of the behaviors in your own relationship, in your own life. And
Mhm.
I see what happened to me play out with so many women, which is we sort of almost obsessively start to really like, why did he do that? What's going on? Why is he treating me this way? What can I do differently? How can I change? All these things. And
Mhm.
that is important to learn, what is a trauma bond and what is cognitive dissonance and labeling some of the behaviors like gaslighting, manipulation, and whatever, even some of the pop culture terms of recognizing dog whistling and flying
Mhm.
monkeys and all those things. But
Mhm.
that's not where the healing actually happens. That's in the part where you realize what's going on. But the healing to me starts to happen when you look back at where this all came from. So I love the concept of the traitor within because when we look back at our childhoods and at our families of origin, I think that there's so much to be said for where we came from. I don't think it's fair to say that survivors all came from abuse or
Mhm.
that we're lacking in self worth or self respect as a whole. We're all individuals.
Mhm.
But there are some kind of common patterns that you see in conditioning and how women specifically, since that's who I work with, really
Mhm.
looking at how you became a fixer, how you became a caretaker, how you ever thought that the
Mhm.
behavior in your relationship was normal or acceptable.
And that's on society also.
Mhm.
And in the TV
Agreed.
shows that we watch, everything. I mean, we're taught, as you said, to be the fixer, and women will sit together and speak about it with each other. We have pride in
Yes.
it, and they're good qualities. I don't want to say these are not good qualities, but it's when it keeps you in a situation that is abusive, where it fails.
Yeah. a lot of women ask me actually, like, how can I be less empathetic? Or I just don't want to be so compassionate. No, you do want to be empathetic. You do want to be compassionate. You want to reserve that for people who
Right.
deserve it.
That's
You
right.
don't want to lower the good qualities in yourself. You just want to harness them a little bit better and know where to apply them and know when to walk away, which is extremely hard when you've been conditioned to abandon yourself.
Right. I agree. And it's interesting because the name of my book that's coming out, the subtitle is Traitor Within, but the subtitle is how how my desire or my to not abandon myself led me to abandon. I'm sorry, my desire to not be abandoned led me to abandon myself.
What a phenomenal subtitle. That is exactly perfect. That's
Right.
so
Right.
true. We
Right.
are trying to be chosen and trying to not be abandoned, and that we're doing it to ourselves.
Right. Right. And
Yeah,
that's how why I started the whole concept of Traitor Within, because
I
that's what I
love
was
it.
doing. And but I think it is very important to for people to look within, because we can change the part of that, we can make changes for ourselves. And it's never to blame the abuse on yourself. The abuser is 100% at fault. But we can't change them. And as you said, we teach what a narcissist, who a narcissist is, their techniques, their manipulation, as you named them before. And that's important to know, because we have to know that this is happening, that education is very important, but we can't change them. We can only make changes within ourselves so that we can grow and not put ourselves in the same situation again and again.
You're absolutely right. Something just needs to shift. We need to click. We need to get it.
Mhm.
Standing in self respect and knowing yourself, knowing your values so that you don't make the same mistakes. But I love that you pointed out, because I know that sometimes the language that we use when we talk about looking at yourself can sound like you did this to yourself. But you
Right.
look at yourself with curiosity, not judgment. You know,
Hmm.
you're not responsible for the conditions in which you were raised, but you are responsible to help yourself heal and figure it out now so that you can just operate differently, think differently. I know the
Right.
version of me now would
Mhm.
never have stayed in what I went through, but the version of me that existed then, not only did I stay, I didn't see it.
Right, and you don't see it. And
Mhm.
because we have cognitive dissonance, we have our traitor within. Now look at this is my traitor within. Her hands are being covered. Even
Yeah.
when I had moments of this is feels wrong, I would have this voice in my head say, oh, no, 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 you're here to help. That this person had a hard childhood. It's okay. You're too sensitive. Same messaging I had as a kid. This is you. It's your fault. Maybe you need to act this way. Whatever it was that my inner voice was, games it was playing to make sense of what was happening, and to not, and because I knew, I think, that if I had really faced what was happening here, I'd have to leave. And leading to me was abandonment. So it was all this stuff, right?
Yeah, it doesn't help that they frame it that way too, right? I know we say that to ourselves in our own minds. I can't abandon this person. I can't leave. They need my help. When we continue to see them as traumatized, which
Mhm.
truth is, I mean, whether we're talking about abusive people or narcissistic people, I don't really care what the label is.
Nope.
But to just say that it's trauma, I am so off that bandwagon. Maybe they're traumatized, but maybe they're not. But in either case, trauma is not the cause of abuse, and it's definitely not an excuse for abuse.
Right. It is not an excuse for abuse. So, but there is this perfect marriage sometimes of either, and I don't need this I mean this as a description, not in a negative, but as a codependent and someone who is narcissistic, or has high narcissistic traits, or an empath. I mean, all these words we use with someone, it's a perfect match.
It
And
is.
the narcissist is the perfect manipulator, consciously and unconsciously, to take as much as they can from their other, and they pick them too.
Yeah.
They
I believe that they pick their victims really well. You do things early on in the relationship where they're kind of testing you and you don't realize it. And for me, I fell right into all of the little tests. I
Mhm.
failed. For him, I passed. For me, I
Right.
failed.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it's a match made in hell, and heaven for them
Absolutely.
and hell for you,
Yes.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, so so part of what we do, right, is helping people recognize that's where the recognition of the manipulation is. But I think it's important, again, as you pointed out too. Yes, they are who they are for a myriad of reasons. Uh, and we can, as a therapist, I can be empathetic toward it. As a human being, I can be empathetic toward it, but doesn't mean you should be in that relationship. Period.
Right.
No,
Agreed.
you know, and you can say should. So you talked about the person you were years ago, and sometimes I have people do exercises where I will say, what would you say to your 10-year-old self? What would you say to your 12-year-old self? What would you say to your 20-year-old self? What would you say to your 15-year-old self?
Oh, I know if I was talking to a younger version of myself, I would tell myself to have better standards and not care what men think.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say not care what anyone thinks, but I think that the way that women in particular just center men and the way we're conditioned and socialized to do that, the biggest advice that I give my daughter, in fact, who's only nearly 8, is focus on your friendships, focus on your female friendships in particular. That's what matters. Who are you
Mm-hmm.
and who are your friends? And focus on your own happiness. And it doesn't matter. I mean, even adults say crazy things to children all the time of like, oh, does she have a boyfriend? She's
Mm-hmm.
7.
Right.
I immediately snap like that's I
Yeah.
don't that's crazy talk. That's exactly where it starts, right from a little girl. And I do
Yeah.
remember a little boy said something mean about my daughter when she was in senior kindergarten. So she was about like 5 and a half. And I was like, oh, Addie, you must have felt so hurt by that. I'm sorry. And she laughed and she said, who cares what boys think? And
Oh,
I'm
you
like,
did.
well, I am an ace mother. Give
You
me an
did
award.
it.
That's amazing. I've done it.
Yeah.
This is great. I'm glad that it didn't land with her.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a good thing that she's like, that doesn't matter. Who cares what he thinks? It's
No,
irrelevant. I'm like, yes,
I'm
good
so
job.
how amazing that is because I think that if we could teach our little girls, even in school, if teachers can do some sort of course which makes us look within more and our own self-esteem and can, because I know and I started dating my first husband. I was 15 when I started dating him. And
Mhm.
especially if you're with someone who is have narcissistic qualities that you don't may not know yet, it's all consuming. So you do start losing your friends and they do start, or at least lessening your friendships. And it does become about them and everything's about them. And you do get lost. And and I think what you're teaching. And then we talk about intergenerational trauma. You have healed before she was even, when she was young or even
Yeah.
before, I don't know when. But you were able to do this. I am working everything I'm doing now so that I have to backpedal. And my children did see me behave this way with my family. I have adult children. So I am working really hard to stop intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing that too. My kids were 1 and 3 when I left, when I escaped, so to speak. And my daughter's the youngest. She was only 1. So in so many ways, she was very protected only by age and by speed of being able to get out. He discarded me. So I am so lucky. It felt like my world was ending at the time, but like I could hug him now. Thank
Because
you
they let you
for
go.
leaving.
Right.
He did. Yeah. Well, I mean, he's still a narcissist, right? So he let me go, but then like held on at the same time. It was
Right. That's
bizarre, but
yeah.
narcissists, abusers, we know the pattern. But
Yeah.
she was lucky in many ways. My son, however, even at the age of 3, I mean, he witnessed domestic violence and really went through quite a bit. But I did my healing really starting when they were 2 and 4. That's when I started. And I have to say, I've said this to my therapist so many times, I would not be the mother that I am if I hadn't gone through what I went through. I think it makes me a better mother, not just having had the experience, but I mean, the experience that led me to therapy, that led me to actually heal my own childhood wounds and be, well, I mean, honestly, my screen name has always been stronger than before. And that obviously came from somewhere. I feel connected to that phrase. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it made me stronger than before. I wasn't weak.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just stronger now than I ever was, but it's because of all of the work that I've done. And I remember entering therapy thinking, I want to talk about my ex. I want to talk about what happened and why I stayed. And it didn't even occur to me that I would
Mm-hmm.
be talking about my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see any connection at the time. And obviously in hindsight, duh. But I was just sort of like, no, we don't need to talk about when I was a kid. I want to talk about why I was in that relationship. And she's like, yeah, we need to do that. It's all
So
connected. We can do both.
I can't help now then to piggyback for your Traitor Within story, since you are starting.
Yeah, well, perfect. So I guess, I often refer to myself as the daughter of a British woman. And I say that because what you may think of, your sort of maybe stereotypical British person, she's Canadian, but her family is British, and
Mhm.
it's just sort of well mannered, and being ladylike was important, and being a good woman was important. I didn't grow up particularly religious, so I didn't have that. But the truth is, at least I've learned now, the patriarchy, religion, it's just so connected.
Mhm.
There's a lot of the beliefs are the same of what it is to be forgiving, and but that's for women to be forgiving and make space for men. And as an adult, all the work that I've done in learning the patriarchy, it now makes a lot of things from my childhood make sense. But being raised by someone who is amazing. Like I have no negative comments to make about my mother. She's a wonderful mother, a wonderful person, a kind-hearted person, and never intended any harm, obviously. But there are still lessons that we learn. And I think of things like specific little snippets that as an adult, you look back and go, well, how did I internalize that message? And an example that I have always thought of is this one where she said, pick your battles. And I know what she meant. As an adult, I understand. I know the intention. She meant like, don't sweat the small stuff, don't fight over ridiculous things. But
Mhm.
what I somehow heard, because she even gave an example of, if when you get married one day, you find that your husband puts his socks on the floor constantly. And I think I was like 21 or something. Like I was nowhere near, being in long-term committed relationships. I was still in college. But she said, if you're not going to divorce your husband over his socks on the floor, just pick him up. You know what I mean? What's the big deal?
Mhm.
And so when I look back, I think, okay, so I remember when I was in a long-term abusive relationship, there was this scenario where he would come home late at night because he worked an evening shift, and he would eat chicken wings and drink on the couch, whatever. And I would wake up in the morning and all the pillows on the couch are all disheveled and the blankets unfolded, and there's chicken wings on the coffee table, and, hot sauce on the carpet and cans around, just chaos.
Mhm.
Don't worry, just pick it up, right? It's not no big deal. Don't make a stink. Don't make this a battle. And like that's not a good way to look at it.
Mhm.
That's actually, it's not about the socks. It's not about
Right.
the pillows. It's not
Yeah.
about the chicken wings. It's about the respect. It's about caring what someone else has to wake up to in the morning. And the truth is, it's not like he would clean it up in the morning. I had to clean it up. And if I
Mhm.
left it and went to work, I'd come home and it's still there. So
Mhm.
like there's no,
Mhm.
so when I look back, it's just these messages of be
Mhm.
ladylike and sit with your legs crossed and wear makeup and keep your hair a certain way and don't swear and use these words and be
Mhm.
this and be that, be the good daughter, get straight A's.
Mhm.
And I had a sister who's my Irish twin. She's 13 months older than me. Love her to death. She's trouble when she was a teenager. Like,
Mhm.
no, I wouldn't wish her lifestyle as a teenager on any mother. And I hope so much that my kids don't do anything that she did. But she was like a party animal. She
Mhm.
would steal and go to raves when she was 13 and just do crazy things. And it took a lot of focus off me, but it also meant that like she was bad and I was good. And so I needed to play that role. And I was ignored and neglected in a lot of ways because my sister needed so much attention. And
Mhm.
my mother and father split up. So my mother was really a single mother raising us.
Mhm.
And how's she supposed to do that? I get it. As an adult, I can look back and say, I know she had a hard time doing it and she's got her own trauma that we could, keep going back further and talk about her traitor within. But
Mhm.
I get it now. But in the moment, it was just, I felt lost and unseen and unchosen. And like I had to perform, I had to be good. I had to get straight A's. I had to be the ladylike one because she wasn't. So there was just
Mhm.
this need to be that way.
Mhm.
And my father is he's alive, but I just meant was in the sense that he's not this way anymore. But he was a workaholic and drank too much and had an affair. And my parents' marriage fell apart. And my mother never said a bad word about him ever. In fact, she
Mhm.
never told us about the affair. It was her mother told us about it. And my
Oh.
mom was furious. But
Mhm.
it's, you know, being raised that way. And I saw my dad all the time, you know, I think it was every other weekend. I can't really remember, but we saw him anytime we wanted to. Every other weekend, we would still see him. But we were really raised by my mom. My dad was not really one for like rules, but he's an authoritarian. And there was a lot of fear, and there's an expression on his face that my sister and I both can make at each other. And we both are like, yeah, that's dad's face. Like, oh, that fear of like, don't mess up, don't be different. But we also watched when they were married, because we were 8 and 9 when they split up. Mom stays home, mom makes dinner, mom does everything, dad goes to work, dad does nothing. Even when mom worked later, dad doesn't do anything. It was always her. So you watch that, you see that, and then you learn, oh, okay, so women self-sacrifice. Okay, so women stay, women pick their battles, women are forgiving. My mother is always like just give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. And so when he would scream at me and call me a B word, maybe he didn't mean it that way. Maybe he's just traumatized. I just always had this, it must be something else. It could never just be that I didn't even know what a narcissist was, but I mean, abusive, never. Because speaking of cognitive dissonance that you mentioned, I would never stay in an abusive relationship. Right. So I couldn't possibly have been in one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's brutal to grow up that way. It really, and I see my own story, and I see it in other women. You know, we all have different mothers and different whatever. And some people have horrendous parents who said and did awful things. But more often than not, I speak to people whose parents, I want to say did their best, but you know, there's a million reasons, right? Depending on generations and age and all the things. I know as a millennial, I know the stereotype of a millennial is that we are so, you know, how do I be the perfect parent? And you can't be. That's a really good place to start, is that's an impossible thing. Right. But I don't know. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. Like you weren't reading parenting books, and therapy wasn't normalized. And so I don't know. I think my parents both, I would say, truly give them that credit that they did the best that they could. But I internalized these messages, and I became a woman who made excuses for men and mistreatment in general, you know? And I think that, and it's interesting because my sister grew up to take no crap from anyone. Like she grew up almost rebelling against the idea that you have to let people treat you a certain way. She's like, absolutely not. So she's got an intensely strong personality. I'm somewhere in between, but I've certainly stepped into more of myself now. But you have to spend a lot of time in therapy and really learn where a lot of these beliefs came from. Even that it matters that a man chooses you. I have to admit, I'm at a point now where like there's nothing that matters to me less than the opinion of a man. I don't care. And I'm happily engaged, and I love my father. I have a brother. He's my half brother. We didn't grow up totally together, but like wonderful man. I think I have a wonderful son. I have men in my life that are great. I don't hate men, but opinion of a man, please, doesn't matter. But it did.
Right. And the thing about being chosen, many of us out there, you know, you wait for them to choose you. If they choose you, like, yay, I won the prize.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
have a boyfriend.
They are. It's like,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I remember some early experiences in high school, like frankly, you know, even before high school, because again, my sister was a year older than me, and because she was trouble, you can imagine she was trouble with boys too. So I was exposed to a little bit younger than the average kid was in the 90s, to boys and things like that. And I remember wanting the attention of boys. In fact, I remember conversation. My sister and I both remember this conversation. I remember more, but my mother was having like a birds and the bees talk. And I don't remember my exact age, but 10, 12, 10, like in that range, maybe it was 11, let's say. And she like had a cucumber and a condom and like explained how to put it on. And I have to, as an aside, I remember being like, they're that big? No, thank God. But I remember this whole kind of like, you know, and this is what boys will say anything. Boys will tell you that their D is going to fall off. They're going to tell you that their testicles will turn blue. And she was saying this. And I remember as an adult now going back and having this conversation with my sister. And I said, for me, what I heard was like, holy crap, be careful, because boys are going to say anything and try to convince you. So you have to really stay away from boys like that. And my sister heard, if that's what boys want, you should give it to them, which is in no way what my mother said, and certainly not what she meant. But
But so interesting because you were at the same place with the same
yeah,
conversation. So you
same conversation.
because you hear about, obviously siblings are different age groups and whatever, and they grow up and they can tell you totally different stories about their family life and their parents, totally, completely. But you're talking about one conversation, two people, the exact same time, and having two
Yeah.
completely different
Just interpretations of, because she remembers what was said. It matches what I
yeah.
think was said. But
Wow.
the interpretation, I was like, oh, stay away from these guys. And she was like, so that's what they want? Okay. So give it to them. Okay. So I spent a lot of time in my life staying away from men, which in hindsight, still great advice, in all honesty. Certain men you should absolutely stay away
Right.
from. But I was a lot more cautious. But do you see how I also thought I was incredibly discerning? Because I'm like, oh, I know what some of these guys will say. Stay away
Right.
from those guys.
Right. So
But what
why
I
did your
didn't know,
yeah, why did this person, your ex, why was he safe for you then? Why was he the one you picked or allowed?
so I'm going to tell you a little story to answer that question.
Yeah.
So when I first started, when I started online and making content, this is where I joke I was just some woman from somewhere, because I was just some woman talking about leaving an abusive relationship. I wasn't making content, wasn't whatever a content creator is. I wasn't a coach. I was just some woman in the middle of a global pandemic, right? Just talking about my life.
Mhm.
And I made a video and I said, I want to tell you about my ex. He is funny and sweet and kind and magnetic. And if you have a party, you'd want him to be there. He'll give you the shirt off his back. He'll make sure everybody's having fun. He's just incredible. And he beat me.
Mhm.
And it was my first viral video. And
Mhm.
I feel like that answers the question of like what made him safe. He was the most amazing man I had ever met. He was so kind and funny, and there was electricity, there
Yeah.
was chemistry. I remember, it's funny, on one hand, I hope he never hears this, but I was riding on the back of his motorcycle and he put his hands behind him to touch my legs, and he was just rubbing my knees when we were at a stoplight. And I remember being like, oh, this is, I am in
I,
love with this man.
yeah,
It's
I get
it's
it.
electric. Yeah. Felt safe. I felt seen. Little things like we went to a restaurant with some friends, and I have this really weird thing. It's so weird. I have to sit in a certain chair. It's different depending on where I am. I need
Mhm.
my back to a wall, and everything else needs to be to the room. Sometimes there's sort of two chairs that might work, but I'm just weird. I'm a weirdo with that. It's not OCD, but it feels a little OCD with the
Did
chairs.
it happen
Uh,
after your abuse, or was it always
nope,
there? Okay.
always my whole life. I have
Okay.
a specific spot. My family knows it. Everyone accepts it, or
So what?
don't sit with me. You can't sit here. But he knew that about me. We were only dating for like 3 months or something. And we were in a group of people that neither of us really knew that well. And someone sat down and he went, I'm so sorry to ask you this. Do you care where you sit? Would you mind sitting there and Lisa can sit there? And she was like, yeah, no problem. And she looked a little weird, but she was like, sure. And we all had a good time,
Mhm.
no big deal. But I was like, oh my God, like this is a guy that remembered that I said that and cared enough to ask. I would never ask someone to move seats. I'm not that crazy. I just prefer it a lot. But for
Mhm.
him to ask, I was like, wow, this guy really cares about me. He's just amazing. So when he called his mom a B word to me, not to her, I was like, whoa, that was the first red flag. But I will say that I hate when people talk about like, oh, you saw the red flags and you just stayed. Hold on. He called her a B word. And what happened inside me is not then, but now, as I can reflect back, that's weird. I didn't really know. I mean, I'd heard the word misogyny before, but it really wasn't part of my vocabulary. And I was 27, by the way. And I remember just sort of being like, ugh, I would never say that about my mother. But then he said things about his mother. And I was kind of like, well, she sort of sounds like a B word. Okay. Later, he called his little sister, who I think was like 19 or 20 at the time, a C word. And I was like, oh, okay. So this guy has a bad family. No, what I missed was this guy is a misogynist and he speaks very poorly about women in general. This guy hates his mother. He hates his siblings, especially his sisters, has something crappy to say about every single one of them. When his youngest sister was 16, and he spoke the most highly of her, but not that well.
Mhm.
And he called servers who were female sweetheart.
Oh yeah.
But
So
to be clear, he didn't call male servers like boss or, bro, or he just wouldn't have any kind of pet name for them. And in hindsight, it's like those were the things that now I would never. If a man said to me on a date that his mother is a B word, she may be, but why are you telling me that on a date? We're not even together yet. I don't know you. And all I know is that about you. That's information. But back then it was like, oh, his family was so mean to him. He's traumatized. And it was the beginning of seeing him as the victim. I once had a conversation with Dr. Kristen Milstead, and she was talking about that early stage and the way that they tell you stories and they open up to you, they become really vulnerable. And it does two things. One, you start to see them as safe because they're vulnerable, and you open up and you start sharing stories, which will obviously later be thrown in your face and used against you.
Right. Did your husband ever use the chair against you, or did he keep that safe?
No, I don't think he ever did.
Okay, good.
He never did, actually. There are many things he used against me, but that wasn't one of them. One thing that he used against me, actually, it was so interesting because in my childhood, I really didn't feel likable. I wasn't popular. And I find it so funny now because the personality that people certainly would see on my content, and even if you knew me in real life, I'm not different. My content is who I am. But it wasn't who I was. I was, I don't know if I'm not going to call myself a nerd. I don't know if that's fair, but like I was a B plus, A minus, usually sometimes A plus student. And it's not like I had glasses or whatever. I just didn't have a lot of friends. I had a very small group of friends, but I was constantly, obsessively worried about whether or not people like me. That is my absolute number one screaming red alarms childhood wound, period, the end. And I don't ever remember telling him exactly that, but I do remember telling him stories about a sleepover that I once wanted to host. And I invited a bunch of girls that I wanted to be friends with. And not only did they not come, nobody even RSVP'd one way or the other. It was like they never received the invitation. It was just like I was a ghost, which probably was the worst possible outcome, trying to make new friends and you get ignored, not even told no. No would have been better because at least I would have an answer. But it was just I'd tell him little stories like that. And I remember throughout our relationship, he would say things like, well, that's why you always have problems, because you're not likable, or at least not everybody likes you. And he would say things like, don't worry, like not everybody has to like you. It's not a big deal. It's just that's why everywhere you go, you have an issue with someone, because it's just like it's who you are. You're an acquired taste.
Or he slips it in.
But he's not criticizing me. He is, right? But it's sort of like, no, I mean, it's no big deal, Lisa. Don't be upset.
Well, it's very strategic and it's cruel because it just slips it in like did I really hear that, or is it just
right? But
sensitive?
when it's framed like the truth, right? And then I'm like, what the hell? And he's like, well, you can't get mad at the truth. And there's truth in it, in that I don't like everybody. You don't like everybody. So why would everybody like you? So there is truth in that, which is so interesting. Dr. George Simon always says that they use truth, little grains of truth, to make things sting particularly hard. So it was sort of like, yeah. So I worked in hospitality, and in hospitality, there's a very high turnover rate, but I would go somewhere, work there for 2 years, go work somewhere else for a year, go somewhere else. I was in events and sales and whatever. And he would always sort of be like, yeah, but that's why you keep losing jobs. And I'm like, losing? I'm quitting jobs. What do you mean? Or that's why you and so don't get along. Like, I remember there was a woman who I thought, in my perception, I don't know, she seemed very threatened by me. I was new. I was stereotypically prettier than her. I don't mean to say I'm prettier than her. I mean, like, from a standpoint of what's socially considered attractive. And I just felt like she hated me the minute I walked in the door. There was nothing I could do. And I tried to befriend her, and we were in the same roles, but had different things to sell. She just didn't like me, which, again, like in hindsight, okay, not everybody likes you. No big deal. But it was like, see, that's why she doesn't like you, because of you. It's your personality. What the hell did I do? She didn't even know me. And that's what I should have said to myself.
Right.
That's a story that he's saying. Why am I so inclined to take that on?
Right. That's why I always say, just because someone says it doesn't make it true.
Right. Yeah. But then you go back and you look,
but
where did this come from?
he's hitting your wounds.
Right.
That's why
Yeah.
it's hard to say that.
Yeah.
Because the
Like, so then the
emotions come
question,
first. Yeah.
yeah, the question to me becomes, what
Mhm.
made it so easy to believe that you weren't likable, that
Mhm.
people don't like you, and that that's a flaw in you rather than a fact of everybody?
Mhm. Yeah.
So you look back in your childhood and you start to go, like what was said to me. And I
Mhm.
think there was a lot of, when you look at, I guess, even the concept of who you can become if you have the freedom to just be who you are, if you were just
Mhm.
accepted by your parents.
Yeah.
And again, I don't feel like my mother rejected me, but what I'm saying is, be more ladylike, sit up, wear pantyhose, wear
Mhm.
makeup, don't this,
Right.
be that, be softer, be kinder, be more forgiving, consider other people's perspectives. You're constantly being told how to shapeshift. Of
Yeah.
course, I grew up and internalized that I wasn't likable. I was
Mhm.
constantly being told all the ways I needed to be different.
Mhm. I always said that the ideal parenting, without going into details, is you create a safe space for a person to grow to be themselves. You teach them empathy, that's vital, but you give them a safe place to grow and be themselves, and you encourage it and you praise it, and you don't try to mold somebody, and then you let them fly and be a safe place to come back when they need you.
Yeah, that's my hope. As a mother myself, I really look back and I think over the years, and my kids are only 7 and 9, almost 8 and 10, how I raise them and what I say to them, and how things I say can be internalized in ways that I did not mean. So I'm probably a classic millennial in the sense that I overthink the hell out of parenting, but I really, them feeling accepted matters so much to me. My son is ADHD, and I think even the idea of the way that some people with ADHD or neurodivergent people in general kind of mask and
Mhm.
have to sit still, don't do that, especially ADHD. What is the stat? Something like they're told 20,000 times more than an average kid. Stop, no, don't. Somehow corrected 20,000 times more than a kid who's neurotypical. And I think, that's the world and I have no control over that. But I'll tell you what, my son Joe is going to be whoever he is when he's at home,
Right.
and he
That's
will be fully accepted. So if he's stimming, instead of like, Joe, stop that, it's redirection, perhaps, because yeah, you can't always be like blurting out noises and stuff. That's irritating. I completely get it. But to be like, God, you're so annoying,
yeah,
that's
that's
horrible.
correct.
Horrible.
Yeah.
He's going to internalize that. So I want Joe to feel completely accepted. And I want my daughter Addie to feel completely accepted and not worry about what boys think and all of that. I want her to
Mhm.
value herself first, even her friends. I don't want her to overthink that either. But what do you think? Really
Mhm.
good advice. And I wish that my mother, I guess, had this advice
Mhm.
of, there was this expression. I learned this from a child therapist who said to me, you say to kids, I'm so proud of you. But what is better is, you must be so proud of yourself.
Right. Because you
You
want them
did
to
such a
internalize.
great job.
Right.
Yeah.
They
So you're
can't.
still complimenting them, but
Yeah.
you're encouraging them to find the pride within themselves so that they're not like, I want to earn my parents' pride. It's
Mm-hmm.
that they see that they need to be proud of themselves. And I'm like, it's just these little shifts
I
in
know.
language that matter.
And it is little shifts in language. And then to know also that if we do something, say something not perfect one day, we can backtrack. They're listening to us.
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
you know,
Repair, coming back later and going, I said that and I think I misworded that, and what I meant was, and re-explain something, and or asking, how did that land for you? What does that mean to you? Do you understand what
so it
I'm saying? And it's
opens up a
important.
discussion and it teaches them that they can make a mistake and backtrack and actually repair the mistake. Also, it's everything we do. I mean, this is enough to make you crazy. Like you said, you're always thinking, but everything that we do will affect them in some way.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
can repair also.
Yeah. And I learned, for me, it was on me to repair in my relationships. It was on me to chase and understand. And I see that pattern in so, like, too many women, right? Where
Oh yeah.
we want to figure out why he's abusive. Why is he doing this?
How?
Instead of just, he is doing this
Right.
and I don't care why he's
Not
doing it.
okay. And it's not okay.
It's just not okay. And I hope, if I teach my children nothing else, it's that why someone's doing something is relevant but not important. I understand wanting to know it, I do,
Yeah.
but that's the least important part about it. It's that they're treating you badly. Because why? So like, so what, you can convince, because where my brain went when
Yes.
I was really in two abusive relationships. I primarily talk about one, but when I think about it, it was like, but why? And if I can figure out why, then I can explain to him why, and then he'll stop. And that
Or
is not
or
true.
you can repair it.
Yes, we can
It's
fix it. I can love him enough.
that's a biggie. I can love him enough. And
Yeah. And you can't.
you can't.
No.
And I think this, so we give education because it is important to understand,
Mhm.
so we can remove so we can say this is who they are and we're not responsible for who they are. But yes, but the most important thing is about ourselves. But women, and I can't say men don't do this, but I know women have a tendency of something's happening in their relationship, and then women get together and like, what do you think that he meant? What do you think that meant? What, right? We become hyper um, uh, focused on. I mean, I know that I lost a lot of time in my relationship spending time thinking about what they're thinking, why they're doing, because nothing makes sense. It doesn't make sense that they're acting a certain way because it wasn't the truth. It doesn't make sense that, just things the confusion is constant. So you're trying to make sense. So many women will get together and say, okay, this happened. What do you think it means? What do you think it means? And everyone's guessing. And then you're like, oh, okay. And you listen to your friend or whatever. But the truth is, unless you understand the personality. And then it's pretty simple, in my opinion. Once you understand, they're very predictable.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm really glad that there is this whole community out there that is teaching it, because teaching it is important. But
Yes, I agree. It is the first step. It is. You need it. It's
and
just not where the change
no,
happens.
the change happens within. And that's why the whole
Mhm.
Traitor Within came about, and whatever else
Yeah.
to do to make someone stronger. I have not personally done psychotherapy except for bereavement work with my hospice patient families in a very long time because I'm focusing on the education piece, but the education to help themselves, the Traitor Within. But to be able then to go to you. And so tell me about your program. What happens when somebody comes to you? What's the process? What do you teach? How does it work?
So I feel like I kind of have, after all of these years, come up with two arms of my business. And the first is breaking the trauma bond. So women who are experiencing a trauma bond or even just a very deep attachment, because
Mhm.
not every abusive relationship means you're in a trauma bond. And the
Mhm.
short version is just trauma bond is an unhealthy attachment that exists in an abusive relationship. Could be with anyone. I focus on romantic partnerships, but that doesn't matter. And there's an oscillation of kindness and cruelty. There's the pain and the comfort, the knife and the band-aid.
Mhm.
And it creates an addiction like feeling. So when you just feel like, I love this person and I want them to change and I don't understand why they treat me this way and I can't leave, but I kind of hate them, but I really love them and I can't picture life without them, but I know I can't do this anymore. That chaos. And you can even still be trauma bonded when you're like, I don't want this man at all. I want nothing to do with this person, but I can't leave,
Mhm.
and everything in between. But you're very attached. So I help people process that and create detachment, build skills to resolve cognitive dissonance. A
Mhm.
phenomenal book is Traumatic Cognitive Dissonance by Dr. Peter Salerno. It's
Mhm.
phenomenal. He coined the term traumatic cognitive dissonance. And that's different. Primarily, I'm very much paraphrasing, but people are creating the cognitive dissonance in you. They are intentionally creating confusion. So it's not your average cognitive dissonance, it is trauma. So it's just a great resource. But I teach women how to resolve the cognitive dissonance, create detachment, build emotional regulation skills and distress tolerance, how to reframe their thinking, how to overcome limiting beliefs, how to name things and make better meaning of it. The story of like, but I feel attached, therefore I love him. No, you feel attached because you're trauma bonded. Let's talk about that. So I help them kind of process that and create the skills that actually allow you to break a trauma bond. And it's three steps. The first is education and clarity, which we're talking about is learning. That is the first piece. The second step is learning about yourself, your unmet needs, why, how, going into your childhood. And step three is building a life that does not include this person anymore. Building actual self worth, self love, self respect, and really, what are your values? Who do you want to be and how to create that life? Because you can't just leave and go push off into your life. Sometimes you feel lost. at best. So that's the trauma bond side of the business. I have a course, which is a self-paced program that people can get into that's 12 modules, and it's just on your own, really affordable, $97. So people can register for the trauma bond recovery course, or I have a live interactive group coaching version of that course where it's coached over 12 weeks. So it's very similar content, but live. And we do it in groups of 8 to 10 women. So we host those every so often, every other month, sometimes every month, depending on season. And those programs sell out so fast. And then the second arm of my business is in rebuilding after you've broken a trauma bond, because you break it and then what? You go off and you go into another abusive relationship because you haven't fully healed. You know, you get over him, but you didn't change yourself and change the parts of you that thought this was normal. So I help people on the rebuilding side. So people can work with me one-on-one in any trauma bond recovery or in rebuilding. And I don't have a course for the rebuilding side of things, but I've written books on the topic, and I do have a group coaching program called Rise and Rebuild. And it's 12 weeks as well. I was going to say in person, but I mean online in person. So we go through self-identity and just the rebuilding and a little bit of childhood stuff and regulation skills and building your values and just learning about yourself and your self-concept, self-love, and really dig into that. And I lastly host in-person programs. One of the programs I host is actually with Dr. Peter Salerno, who wrote that book, Traumatic Cognitive Dissonance, but it's called Unbreakable and Irreplaceable. And then we have different subtitles depending on what program we're running, but we have one in June in Toronto, Canada. And that one's June 5th to 7th. So Unbreakable and Irreplaceable, from survival to self-respect. And that one's only 24 women. And we teach these workshops over the weekend, and everybody's just in the room. And like, it's so different, you know, because I only work online with people. It's so different having these women in the room. But I've hosted tons. I've been to Mexico and Florida, California, Texas, more all over, and really focused on helping women in the room. And it's a totally different experience being in person.
And how often do you do the in-person, did you say?
In person, we do it approximately twice a year. So this year we're doing Toronto, and then there's a strong probability, we haven't booked it yet, but a strong probability of doing Connecticut in November.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Your programs sound amazing. And you have books, you said. What are the books that you wrote?
I do. I have the Trauma Bond Recovery Journal, and that one actually has sold like 7,000 copies. So it's quite a popular book. I'm so happy that, you know, I'm unhappy that so many people need that kind of content, but I'm happy that it's reaching the right people. And then I have this sort of part 2 version of that, which is part of the series, Rebuilding After a Trauma Bond, a Self-Love Journal. Both of those are workbook journals where you go through and you're prompted questions. It's especially good for people who don't like journaling, because, you know, you just open a blank notebook and you're like, I don't know what to write. Right. So it gives you a prompt 5 days a week because you need a break. So it's 60 questions. You can get those on Amazon. And then I have a workbook called Surviving to Thriving, a 6-step blueprint to narcissistic abuse, healing, and recovery, that I co-authored with a psychologist, Dr. Carrie McAvoy. And then I wrote one called Narcissism Unmasked. That one is my most favorite one, actually, because it's really it's like a dictionary. It's really a guidebook or a handbook of all the common tactics that are used. And it's so great for people that are like, I don't understand what the hell is going on here. It's all of the definitions, the pop culture terms, the clinical terms, and then it's broken down in a way that you can understand it really well. And then I have a new book coming out in about a month that I am currently running a poll on the title. I'm not sure what the title will be, but it is specifically on rebuilding after abuse. And it's not a workbook, it's a book, but it gives you a lot of how to. One of the things that I think has differentiated me from a lot of people is I'm not just online talking about things. I'm so like, but how do you implement what you just said in real life? How do you make that an actual thing? How do I integrate that? Because I think we see so much, and people are like thinking they're healing, but if you don't know how to integrate it, you don't know how to actually apply the things you're learning.
Without a question.
What good is it all? Right. Yeah. So I'm a how-to action, practical steps kind of woman.
And what are your choices if we did a poll right now for your title?
So the two that are top choices right now is the woman you became,
Mm-hmm.
the woman you become, excuse me, and coming back to yourself. And then I'm kicking around two different subtitles, one more around rebuilding after an abusive relationship or coming back to your identity after leaving. So and it's what's crazy because actually the poll is depending on the day, they're
Don't
so close.
don't
I
give
don't
me.
know.
But let me ask you a
Yeah.
question.
Do you have an opinion?
Well, I may have a question that may influence you. So, because again, hospice, I'm always thinking, but I think of it this the same way because I think about the grieving that happens after a relationship, and we've lost parts of yourself, and you're always creating a new normal. So, are you going back to the same, or are you creating a new?
I think so. I'm going to answer it with the comments that people left in the survey because really it's just click, click, click. But there's a spot where if you want to, you can write more. And some people are like, coming back to yourself is what you want because that's it. You find yourself again. This is so great. And some people are like, I hate that title because you're not going back to yourself. You are
Right.
stronger than before. And I'm like, God, they both have a point.
Yeah.
I personally resonate more with the woman you become
Mm-hmm.
because whether you're creating a brand new version or finding old parts of yourself and mixing in new parts, it's still the woman you become. So
So,
I feel
so
like
I
I'm
would
leaning
vote.
towards that.
If you want my vote, it would be
I
that.
do.
Because I don't
Okay.
think we want to go back to well, I shouldn't speak for other people, but the person you were before was the person who didn't understand this, the person that allowed themselves, and I hate to use that
Yeah.
big, the part that you can change, to stay or get into
Yeah.
a relationship like that.
Yeah.
So
Feels hopeful.
it feels hopeful. I don't
Yeah.
want to, I mean, I love a lot of me before, don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
and
Me
I was
too.
definitely healthier before, but I am better now. So
Yeah. That's exactly. So maybe you've just convinced me, I think I have to choose a name in the next like 4 days because I'm ready to publish it.
are you
So
excited?
I am. I am. It's such an amazing thing. I've been trying to do one a year, but I didn't write one last year because I was just too
Spend?
busy. It's like
Oh,
the whole
okay.
year flew by. I had no time. I don't know
Mhm.
how I had time this year either, to be fair, but
Mhm.
I'll keep going.
Congratulations. Amazing.
Thank you.
Is there anything you would like to share about the Traitor Within or about yourself before we close?
Oh, I love the concept of the traitor within so much. I really want people to know how important that is to look back at where you came from without any judgment and just be so curious with yourself, learn what got you here, because that'll help you figure out what felt normal, what doesn't, what's learned can be unlearned.
Mhm.
So you really are given an opportunity when you start looking at yourself. So I know it's hard work. I know it's terrifying work and it's so hard to change. And it also feels really unfair. I used to get really pissed off, honestly, that why I have to change? What do you mean? I'm not abusive. He's abusive. But I say this with all the love and respect. And I say it to myself, even like I tolerated abuse.
Mhm.
Why?
Right. Mhm.
Answer the question. You don't owe anyone else the answer. Just answer it just to yourself, or maybe just you and your therapist, whatever. But answer that question. Why? What made it feel normal? And choose differently. I have this sort of like old Lisa would do blah blah, and new Lisa is going to do it differently. So when you look back at that 7-year-old version of yourself, reparent that part of yourself, talk to that part of yourself. What would you have said when you were 15? What advice would you have given yourself? Take the advice, no matter how old you are now.
Mhm. You mean the woman you become?
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. I love it.
Thank you very much. I adore you.
Thank you.
If you're interested in learning more about your Traitor Within, grab the journal. Visit www.jessicaannpressler.com for more.